Introduction. Why consistency changes everything. Let's be honest. If you've ever chased a goal, tried to change a habit, or dreamed of building something meaningful, then you've probably felt that inner tug of war. You start off strong. You're excited. The vision is clear. You can almost taste the result. But somewhere along the way, maybe in week 2, month 3, or after that first setback, the motivation fades. The fire dims. Life gets in the way. And quietly, almost unnoticeably, you start to drift back into old patterns. It's not because you didn't care. It's not because the dream wasn't worth it. And it's definitely not because you're not capable. The truth is, success isn't reserved for the most talented, the most connected, or even the most passionate. It belongs to those who keep showing up, day in, day out, whether they feel like it or not. That's the power of consistency. Now, I know it's not sexy. It doesn't make for thrilling headlines. It won't give you the adrenaline rush that comes from a sudden breakthrough or a viral moment. But behind every breakthrough you admire, every success story you see, there's a quiet force at work. A rhythm, a repetition, a commitment to doing the work, especially when it's not exciting anymore. This book isn't here to hype you up and then leave you hanging. It's not another pep talk that wears off by next week. What you're holding in your hands is a deep dive into the truth behind never giving up. Not just the emotional rah-rah of it, but the psychological, practical, real-life framework for what it actually takes to become consistent and to stay that way. Because consistency isn't about being perfect. It's not about never missing a day or never feeling tired. It's about deciding that your vision matters more than your mood. It's about choosing to move forward, even if you have to crawl that day. It's about trusting that small steps, repeated daily, can move mountains. Throughout these pages, we'll explore the science and soul of consistency. You'll see how the most extraordinary achievements are often built on the most ordinary routines. You'll meet people who were never the best, the fastest, or the loudest, but who outlasted the rest through sheer resilience and repetition. And most importantly, you'll begin to recognize this power within yourself. Because here's the truth, you already have what it takes. You don't need another 5-step plan or secret formula. You just need to understand how to keep showing up, even when no one is clapping, even when no results are showing, even when it's boring, frustrating, or feels like nothing is changing. Consistency is the silent work that makes loud results. And this book is your permission to stop starting over, to stop chasing the next big thing, and instead lean fully into what you already know in your gut, that your future is hidden in your daily habits. So take a deep breath. You're not falling behind. You're not broken. You're just one committed choice away from rewriting your story. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Invisible Grind. Success starts when no one is watching. There's something magical about the beginning of a dream. The early days are full of energy, wide-eyed visions, heart-pounding excitement, and that adrenaline-fueled belief that this is it. You buy the planner. You sketch out the plan. You feel unstoppable. For a while, anyway. But what most people don't talk about is what happens after the excitement fades. After the first few wins. After the compliments stop. After the Instagram-worthy parts of the journey give way to routine, silence, and self-doubt. What you're left within isn't motivation. It's the grind. And not the loud, flashy kind. It's the invisible grind. The part where nothing seems to be happening, but everything is being built. You see, success doesn't show up with fireworks. It whispers. It grows quietly in the background while you're repeating the same steps over and over. And most of the time, it looks like nothing is working. It feels like no one sees the effort you're putting in. You question yourself. You wonder if it's worth it. If maybe you're wasting your time. But that right there, that's the moment where most people quit. Not because they're weak. Not because they're lazy. But because the culture we live in has conditioned us to believe that success should be fast, visible, and impressive. That if it's taking time, then something must be wrong. But real mastery, real impact, it's built in the moments no one claps for. The mornings you get up and do the work even though you're tired. The nights you choose progress over distraction. The days you keep going even when your results are invisible. That's what I mean when I talk about the invisible grind. It's the unseen, uncelebrated, often uncomfortable stretch where consistency becomes your superpower. It's where the separation happens between those who start and those who finish. between the curious and the committed. There's this idea that if you're not getting results quickly, you're doing something wrong. But in truth, some of the most meaningful breakthroughs happen behind the scenes, in silence. Growth doesn't always show up on the surface right away. Just like roots growing beneath the soil, progress takes time. And that's hard, I know, because you're putting in effort. You're sacrificing. You're showing up. And yet, nothing seems to be changing. But here's what you need to remember. Every time you choose to show up when it's hard, you're reinforcing something powerful. You're telling your mind, your body, your habits, we don't just show up when it's easy. We show up because it matters. The people you admire, the authors, the athletes, the entrepreneurs, the creatives, they didn't wake up one day and land at the top. What you're seeing is the result of years of invisible grind. Rejection, failure, repetition. They kept practicing long after the novelty wore off. They stayed late, got up early, said no to distractions, and continued when the only thing cheering them on was their own belief. It's so easy to romanticize success stories, but what we often miss are the thousands of quiet, unimpressive days that came before the spotlight. That book wasn't written in a weekend. That brand wasn't built in a month. That mindset wasn't shaped overnight. The people who truly make it are the ones who can stomach the silence, who can embrace the boredom, who can show up on the days that feel heavy and slow. And you can do that, too. This chapter isn't about glorifying struggle for the sake of it. It's about giving you the truth. The truth is, success is possible. Change is possible. Reinvention is possible. But not if you only show up when you feel inspired. You have to outlast the quitting points. You have to stay in the race long enough to see the compounding effect of your consistency. There will be moments you question yourself. There will be days it feels pointless. There will be times when nothing seems to be happening. But keep going anyway. Because the invisible grind is where your character is forged. It's where your discipline takes root. It's where your future self is quietly being built, one ordinary, committed step at a time. So the next time it feels like no one sees you, no one claps for you, and nothing is moving fast enough, remind yourself, this is not failure. This is the process. The magic isn't in the moment the world finally notices. The magic is in the fact that you kept going long before they did. That's the power of consistency. And that's where your breakthrough begins. The invisible grind doesn't just test your patience. It reveals your motives. It asks you quietly, why are you doing this? Are you here for applause? Or are you here for alignment? Would you still show up if no one ever noticed? Would you still write the book, build the business, run the miles, post the content, paint the canvas, or study the subject if it was only you who ever knew it happened? That question will confront you, whether you want it to or not. And when it does, that's where your answer becomes your fuel. Because if your why is rooted in proving something to others, your drive will eventually fade when no one's looking. But if your why is rooted in purpose, in calling, in something that tugs at your soul, even when the world is silent, then even the quiet days will hold power. And don't misunderstand me. We all crave validation. We all want to be seen. That's human. But the danger is in making visibility the measure of progress. Because the truth is, sometimes the most transformative growth happens in seasons of complete invisibility. When no one is applauding. When you're not getting likes or comments or praise. When it's just you and the work. That's the space where grit is born. That's where you build the kind of confidence that doesn't come from praise, but from evidence. The evidence that you can trust yourself to follow through. The evidence that you don't need the high of motivation to keep going. The evidence that you are capable of doing hard things even when it's boring, even when it's frustrating, even when no one's watching. And that's why so many people give up too soon. They think the absence of results means the absence of progress. But what if your breakthrough is sitting on the other side of 30 more days? What if you're halfway through building momentum you can't yet see? What if the internal shifts, the ones preparing you to handle the life you want, are already happening, but they just haven't reached the surface yet? You'll never know if you quit too early. That's the trap. The results you want are often delayed. Delayed but not denied. And this is where consistency becomes a kind of rebellion. A refusal to give up just because it doesn't feel good. A refusal to abandon your potential because the timeline didn't match your expectations. A refusal to play by the rules of instant gratification. You become dangerous when you stop waiting for the right moment and decide to make this moment right. When you stop hoping for external energy and start cultivating your own. When you stop tying your identity to achievement and start tying it to effort. Because here's what changes everything. When showing up becomes who you are, not just what you do, you become someone who finishes, someone who follows through, someone who says, "This is what I do," not because it's easy, not because it's fast, but because it matters. This doesn't mean you won't have off days. You will. Everyone does. Consistency doesn't mean perfection. It just means you come back. You adjust. You recommit. You keep your eyes on the long game. That's how you win. Not with intensity, but with integrity. Not with flash, but with faith. Faith in the process. Faith in yourself. Faith that every single step, no matter how small, is getting you somewhere real. So if today is one of those quiet days where no one sees you, where the voice in your head says, "What's the point?" where your progress feels invisible, I want you to remember this. The invisible grind is the point. This is the work that counts. This is the work most people avoid. And this is the exact kind of work that makes you unstoppable. Chapter 2. Discipline over motivation. Feelings fade, systems stay. Let's be real. Motivation is unreliable. 1 minute, you're fired up and ready to take on the world. You watch an inspiring video, hear the right words, see someone else succeed, and something sparks inside of you. You feel unstoppable. For a while, that energy carries you. You make the plan, buy the journal, maybe even wake up early for a few days. It feels good. It feels possible. And then, life happens. You get tired. Your schedule changes. Something throws you off, or maybe nothing happens at all. No reward, no applause, no visible progress. And just like that, the motivation vanishes. The same goal that felt electric a few days ago now feels heavy, distant, exhausting. Not because you don't care anymore, but because you're running on something that was never meant to last. This is where most people hit the wall. They think, maybe I'm not disciplined. Maybe I don't want it badly enough. But that's not the truth. The truth is, you were never supposed to rely on motivation in the first place. Because motivation is a feeling, and feelings are fleeting. What you really need is a system, a structure, a plan that doesn't ask how you feel every morning before it lets you show up. That's what discipline is. It's a quiet voice that says, "We're doing this anyway." Not because it's convenient, not because it's fun today, but because it's aligned with who you want to become. Discipline doesn't wait for inspiration. It shows up without it. And that's what gives it power. There's a shift that happens when you stop relying on how you feel and start building habits that carry you even when you don't feel like it. That's when consistency becomes possible. That's when progress starts to stick. Because you've stopped gambling your future on whether or not you wake up in a mood. You've anchored your actions to something deeper. Think about brushing your teeth. You don't wake up each morning wondering if you're motivated to do it. You just do it. It's a non-negotiable, a small, automated part of your day. You're not perfect about it, but you're consistent. And that's the secret. Most of what you admire in others, their fitness, their writing, their mindset, their brand, it wasn't built on constant motivation. It was built on non-negotiables, on showing up after the mood passed, on systems that supported them even on their worst days. So if you're tired of starting and stopping, of surging and slumping, maybe it's time to stop asking for more motivation and start designing your environment. Start asking different questions. Not how do I feel about this today, but what's the smallest step I can automate? Not how do I stay fired up, but how do I stay grounded, even when I'm not? It could be something as simple as putting your workout shoes by the door, scheduling your creative time at the same hour every day, preparing your workspace the night before, turning your phone off for an hour, drinking a glass of water when you wake up. These things sound small, but they're powerful. They reduce friction. They create momentum. And over time, they become a lifestyle. Because here's what most people miss. Discipline isn't about forcing yourself. It's about freeing yourself from the constant emotional negotiation, from the highs and lows of inspiration. It's about building a rhythm that works for you. One that still leaves room for grace and growth, but doesn't let every mood derail the mission. There will be days when you fall short. Days when you sleep in, mess up, skip a step, or just crash. That's okay. You're human. Discipline isn't about being flawless. It's about not letting a stumble become a spiral. It's about getting back on track without guilt. You don't have to restart your whole life. Every time you miss a beat, you just pick up where you left off. What starts as a choice becomes a pattern. What becomes a pattern forms a habit. And what becomes a habit eventually feels automatic. That's when it gets easier. That's when the work starts working for you, instead of always against your willpower. And here's the beautiful part. Discipline creates trust, not with other people, with yourself. You begin to believe in your own follow-through. You stop seeing yourself as someone who just can't stick to things. Because now you have proof. You've kept your word to yourself, not once, but repeatedly. That changes how you walk, how you talk, how you show up in the world. So yes, motivation has its place. It's a great spark, a beautiful beginning. But don't build your life on sparks. Build it on something sustainable. Build it on structure. Build it on rituals that move the needle forward, even when the fire goes out. Because that's where the real power lives. Not in being inspired, but in being intentional. Not in waiting for perfect conditions, but in preparing for imperfect days. And not in doing it all at once, but in doing it again and again. Discipline is the bridge between intention and transformation. It's the reason your goals shift from fantasy to reality. And the truth is, it's a muscle, one you can train. You weren't born with it or without it. You develop it, rep by rep, through the choices you make when no one is watching. It grows stronger every time you do what needs to be done, even when you'd rather not. But let's be clear about something. Discipline doesn't mean being rigid or robotic. It doesn't mean shaming yourself into action or living a life devoid of spontaneity. That's where people get it wrong. Real discipline has nothing to do with punishment. It has everything to do with alignment, with knowing what you want and building your life around it in small, grounded ways. It's not about controlling everything. It's about committing to something. Think about the goals you've set in the past, the ones you still think about when it's quiet, the dream that hasn't gone away. The version of yourself you know is in there, somewhere beneath the noise and the excuses. That version of you isn't waiting for you to feel ready. It's waiting for you to get consistent, to make space, to stop chasing hype and start practicing discipline. Because discipline does something motivation never can. It simplifies your life. Instead of waking up every day and making 50 decisions, you've already made one. This is what I do now. That clarity, that's powerful. It removes the emotional tug of war. You don't have to feel inspired to show up. You just have to trust the process you already committed to. And here's another truth. Your environment plays a bigger role than your willpower. The people you're around, the things you consume, the habits you see modeled daily, those all influence your discipline. You can't expect yourself to stay focused if you're surrounded by distraction. You can't expect consistency if your environment is chaos. Sometimes, discipline starts by cleaning up the things that keep pulling you off track. That's why the most disciplined people aren't necessarily the most hardcore. They're just the most prepared. They've removed friction. They've made the right choice the easy choice. Their systems do the heavy lifting, so they don't have to rely on motivation every time. You can do this too. You can design your day to support your goals instead of sabotage them. You can set up guardrails for your attention, your energy, your time. You can stop thinking of discipline as restriction and start seeing it as freedom. Because that's what it really is, freedom. When you know you can trust yourself to keep going even when it's not exciting, you feel unstoppable. Not because things are always easy, but because you've proven to yourself that you'll show up either way. That kind of self-trust, that's rare, and it changes everything. You stop waiting. You stop doubting. You stop starting over. You begin. You begin to notice that even on the days when you're tired, you still made progress. You begin to realize that motivation is a spark, but discipline is the engine. It's what keeps you moving through the noise, through the weather, through the seasons where nothing feels certain. You don't need to hustle harder. You need to anchor deeper, to ground your goals in repeatable action, to build a life where showing up is automatic. Not because it's effortless, but because it's embedded in who you are. So the next time you find yourself waiting to feel motivated, pause and ask yourself a better question. What would the disciplined version of me do right now? Then do that. One step, one task, one rep. That's how you shift your identity. Not by thinking your way into it, but by acting your way into it. Chapter 3. The Compounding Effect. What happens when you keep showing up? There's something strange that happens when you start doing the same small thing, day after day. At first, it feels almost pointless, like brushing your teeth with a paintbrush. The results are invisible. The progress is so slow it feels like nothing is moving. You show up, you check the box, and nothing seems to change. No applause, no milestones, no overnight success. Just you, repeating the process. And that's when most people quit. Because we've been conditioned to believe that results should come quickly. That if it's not working by week 2, something must be broken. That growth should be loud and obvious and measurable at all times. But that's not how it works. At least not for anything that really matters. True progress, real, lasting transformation, moves quietly at first. It doesn't show up in the mirror right away. It doesn't announce itself on your bank statement, your social feed, or your confidence meter. Instead, it stacks. Slowly, quietly, beneath the surface. This is the compounding effect. It's the principle that small, consistent actions, when repeated over time, create exponential results. Not linear, not predictable, but exponential. Meaning, what looks like nothing for a while suddenly becomes everything. And when it clicks, it often looks like it happened all at once. But you'll know the truth, it didn't. It was being built in the background the whole time. It's kind of like planting seeds. You don't water them once and expect a tree tomorrow. You don't stand over the soil demanding results by next Tuesday. You plant, you water, you give it time, you trust the process. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, something sprouts. And eventually, it grows into something far bigger than what you started with. But here's the tricky part. That waiting phase, it's where people bail. It's where impatience sets in. It's where doubt creeps in and says, this isn't working. But the truth is, it was working. You just didn't stay long enough to see the return. Let's say you write for 10 minutes a day. That's barely enough to write a paragraph. But do that every day for a year, and you'll have over 60 hours of writing. That's a book. Or imagine saving $5 a day. That doesn't feel like much. It's just coffee money. But stretch that out over years. Add in a little interest, and suddenly you've built something solid. The principle is the same in every area. Fitness, creativity, confidence, communication, relationships. The tiny effort, done consistently, becomes a force. But it's not just about numbers. The real magic of compounding shows up in your identity. The person you become by doing the thing repeatedly. That's the real win. Every time you show up, you're not just making progress. You're casting a vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. And eventually, that belief becomes solid. You're no longer someone trying to stay consistent. You're someone who is consistent. You don't have to fake confidence. You've built it, brick by brick, through the days no one saw. That's why showing up matters, even when you don't feel like it. Because those are the reps that count the most. Not just because they move the needle, but because they reinforce your identity. You're no longer at the mercy of motivation. You're moving from momentum, from habit, from self-trust. This is where the game changes. When you realize that you don't need to go all in for a few days. You just need to go a little bit in, every day. You don't need to take huge leaps. You just need to keep taking steps. The compound effect isn't loud, but it's powerful. It doesn't announce itself, but it builds something unshakable. And here's something else to consider. Compounding doesn't just work in the positive. It works in reverse too. Skipping one day doesn't hurt you, but skipping often, making excuses, pushing things off until tomorrow, those compound too. Every little choice adds up. Every decision shapes direction. Over time, you're either compounding growth or compounding regret. That's not to scare you. It's to empower you. Because the small choices are in your hands. You don't need more hours in the day. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to choose, today, to keep showing up. Even if it's imperfect, even if it's small, even if it's barely noticeable. Because the truth is, success is rarely a lightning strike. It's more like a sunrise. Slow, gradual, certain, and you only miss it if you stop looking too soon. So stay with it. Keep planting the seeds. Keep showing up for the process. Because while the world is chasing quick fixes and instant wins, you'll be building something deeper, something rooted, something that will eventually speak for itself. Not because you shouted, but because you stayed. And when the results finally come, and they will, you'll smile knowing that they weren't magic. They were momentum, compounded, patiently, by the one who never gave up. Here's the beautiful irony of the compounding effect. The effort that feels insignificant in the moment often ends up being the most powerful in the long run. It's almost deceptive. You wake up early to journal for 10 minutes, and nothing earth-shattering happens. You go for a short walk instead of skipping movement altogether, and you don't drop 10 pounds overnight. You post something valuable online, and it gets 2 likes. You say no to a bad habit once, and the world doesn't throw you a parade. But deep inside, your system is being rewired. You're teaching yourself something more valuable than any instant result. You're teaching yourself that your word means something, that your choices matter, even when they're small, especially when they're small. Most people miss this because they're chasing moments that feel monumental. The before and after story, the viral post, the breakthrough, the applause. But what they don't realize is that the real transformation is happening in the spaces between those moments. In the quiet, in the repetition, in the times when you say, "I'll do it anyway," even when it doesn't seem to matter. It's the daily act of aligning with your future self, not once in a grand gesture, but again and again in humble, often boring ways. And boredom is an underrated ingredient in success. Everyone loves excitement. Everyone wants fire and novelty and dopamine. But discipline lives in boredom. Progress thrives in it. That's where your edge is. That's where most people tap out. When the task becomes predictable, when the dopamine drops, when the newness fades. But if you can stay in a room when it gets boring, when it's quiet, when no one's noticing, that's when you start to lap people. That's when you start to separate. Because here's the truth. Consistency compounds slowly, then suddenly. And that's when it gets fun. That's when the results start to speak for themselves. That's when your body feels stronger, your confidence becomes steadier, your message reaches further. But by then, you've built so much character in the process that the result becomes a bonus, not the reason. This is where things shift from chasing outcomes to becoming outcomes. You're no longer trying to achieve growth. You're growth. You've lived it. You've earned it. You're not looking for shortcuts because you've built the strength to take the long road. You're not desperate for validation because you've already validated yourself every day you showed up when no one else would have blamed you for quitting. And this is the point where the compound effect starts to reverse the narrative in your head. You're no longer someone trying to get it together. You're someone who has proven, quietly, consistently, that you can keep it together. That changes your posture. That changes your voice. That changes how you look in the mirror, because you're finally seeing the evidence of what was true all along, that you were always capable. You just had to stay long enough for the results to catch up with your effort. So when it gets hard, and it will, don't focus on how far you still have to go. Zoom in. Look at the small win you created today. Look at the promise you kept to yourself. Because that's where the power lives. Not in what you plan to do someday, but in what you're doing right now. And right now, you're planting seeds that your future self will thank you for. Chapter 4. The resistance is the proof. Why obstacles mean you're on the right track. Let's talk about resistance. The kind that creeps in just when you decide to finally do the thing that matters. You know exactly what I mean. The moment you commit to waking up earlier, your bed suddenly becomes the coziest place on earth. You start eating better and suddenly crave every piece of junk food within reach. You decide to write your book, and suddenly your inner critic has more to say than ever before. That's not an accident. That's resistance. Resistance is sneaky. It wears many disguises. Procrastination, doubt, perfectionism, distraction, overplanning, even unexpected fatigue. It's not always loud. In fact, it often whispers in your own voice. Not now. Maybe tomorrow. You're not ready. What's the point? It feels logical. It sounds rational. But underneath it all, resistance is fear in disguise. And here's what most people don't realize. Resistance doesn't show up to stop you from doing something insignificant. It shows up when you're getting close to something meaningful, something that matters, something that stretches you beyond your current comfort zone. In other words, resistance isn't a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're doing something important. Most people misread this. They feel the pushback and think, maybe this isn't the right time. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe it's too hard. But that's exactly the moment when you need to lean in, not pull away. Because resistance doesn't visit the uncommitted. It doesn't knock on the door of mediocrity. It only shows up when you're pushing toward purpose. It's actually a weird kind of compliment. If resistance is showing up strong, it means you're on the edge of growth. You're touching a nerve. You're waking up parts of you that have been dormant. And of course your brain wants to pull you back to comfort. It's trying to protect you. Your mind loves patterns. It loves safety. It loves what's known. So the moment you start to change those patterns, even in positive ways, your brain starts firing off alarms. It doesn't yet understand that discomfort and danger are not the same thing. The key is to expect resistance. Welcome it, not as an enemy, but as a marker. Because once you expect it, it loses its power. You no longer see it as a red flag. You see it as confirmation. You stop interpreting struggle as a sign that you're doing something wrong. You start recognizing it as the sound of your old self being challenged and your future self rising to the surface. You'll feel it the most when you're right at the edge of a breakthrough. That's where it tightens its grip. That's when the voice in your head gets loudest. That's when everything inside you screams to turn around. But that's also when you're closest to your next level. So what do you do with resistance? You move through it, not over it, not around it, through it. You acknowledge it. You say, yeah, I see you, but I'm not stopping. You stop waiting for it to disappear and start building the kind of grit that keeps going in spite of it. And let's be honest, resistance will never fully go away. Even the most successful people feel it. Every time they step into something new, something higher, something more aligned with who they're becoming. The only difference is they've trained themselves not to panic when it shows up. They've learned to see it as part of the process. That's what separates people who stay stuck from people who rise. It's not talent. It's not luck. It's the willingness to sit in the discomfort without running. The willingness to keep writing when the words aren't flowing. To keep training when the results aren't showing. To keep building when no one's clapping. To keep going when every part of you wants to quit. Because here's the truth. Most of your resistance isn't about what's happening externally. It's about what's happening internally. It's your old identity trying to hold on. It's your past limitations fighting for survival. It's the tension between who you've been and who you're becoming. And that tension is a sign of transformation. That means the battle isn't something to avoid. It's something to embrace. Because every time you win a small fight with resistance, every time you do the thing you didn't feel like doing, you shrink the power of that voice. You prove to yourself that your commitment is stronger than your doubt. And little by little, you become someone who doesn't back down when things get hard. You become someone who expects the resistance and shows up anyway. And one day, you'll look back at all the times you kept going through fear, through insecurity, through fatigue, and realize those were the exact moments that built you. Those weren't the weak spots in your journey. They were the making of your character. So the next time resistance shows up, don't let it shake you. Smile. Nod. Let it know you're onto it. Then take the step anyway. Speak anyway. Share anyway. Build anyway. Show up anyway. Because every time you do, you're not just overcoming resistance. You're becoming the kind of person who doesn't stop. And that kind of person, that's the one who changes everything. Here's what most people never realize about resistance. It's not just an obstacle. It's a mirror. It reflects exactly where your growth lives. The task you're most avoiding, that's probably the one that would move your life forward. The project you keep putting off because you're scared it won't be perfect, that's likely the one that matters most. Resistance rarely attacks things that are irrelevant. It's always lurking around the edges of something sacred, something important, something you were probably born to do. It shows up in the silence before you hit publish, in the hesitation before you speak the truth, in the sudden urge to clean your whole kitchen instead of finally sitting down to work on your business. In the, I'll do it tomorrow, that repeats itself for weeks. The cleverness of resistance is that it often looks responsible, productive even. It convinces you that you're doing the right thing by not doing the real thing. You'll say, I need to do more research, or I just want to be fully ready, or I need to get my life together first. But underneath all of those logical excuses is the same fear. What if I try and it's not good enough? What if I show up and no one cares? What if I give it my all and still fail? And that's what resistance feeds on. Your fear of not being enough. So let's clear something up. You are enough. Even if it's messy. Even if it's not perfect. Even if it's quiet and clumsy and slower than you wanted it to be. You don't have to earn your right to begin. You've already earned it by wanting more. You've already qualified by being aware that there's another level in you. That whisper you feel, that nudge to grow, to speak, to build, to lead, that's not random. That's your calling knocking. And resistance. It's just the locked door, not the enemy, just the test. Because resistance isn't proof that you're not ready. It's proof that you are. Think about it. When have you ever felt resistance towards something that didn't matter to you? No one wakes up with crippling anxiety about doing the laundry or taking out the trash. But ask someone to finally start the podcast, share their art, launch the business, tell their story, and suddenly they're battling everything from self-doubt to fatigue to imposter syndrome. That's not a coincidence. That's resistance sensing that you're on the edge of becoming more. And you know what? It should scare you a little. That's how you know it's real. That's how you know it matters. If it were easy, it wouldn't change you. But here's what's beautiful. Every time you face resistance and do the thing anyway, you take its power away. It shrinks. It weakens. It becomes quieter. You realize it's just noise. Just a shadow. Just the final gatekeeper before the next version of you. And on the other side of resistance, there's peace. Not the kind that comes from comfort, but the kind that comes from congruence. From living in alignment. From finally doing what your soul has been begging you to do. It's not that the fear goes away. It's that you stop letting it lead. You stop negotiating with it. You stop needing every step to feel safe and secure. You start acting in faith instead of fear. And faith doesn't mean you always feel certain. It just means you move forward anyway. You stop waiting to feel like the person who's ready and start acting like the person who's becoming. You start making peace with the resistance and learning to recognize it as a sacred signpost. You start saying, "Oh, there you are again. That must mean I'm getting close." And instead of pulling back, you push in. You breathe deeper. You center yourself. And you take the step. Maybe the step is tiny. Maybe it's just opening your laptop, writing one sentence, saying one honest thing, making one phone call. But in that one act of courage, you break the cycle. You remind yourself that you're not ruled by fear. You are ruled by purpose. And purpose always makes the resistance worth facing. Chapter 5. Becoming unstoppable. Consistency as a lifestyle, not a phase. There comes a moment when everything clicks, not all at once, and not in some fireworks-filled, cinematic way, but quietly, subtly like the shift in seasons. You look around one day and realize you become someone who does the thing. Not someone who tries to be consistent, not someone who hopes to be more disciplined, but someone who simply shows up. And not because it's trendy or because anyone's watching. You show up because it's who you are now. This is what it means to become unstoppable, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the kind of grounded, self-trusting way that no longer needs to chase momentum. You create your own. You stop starting over because you finally stop stopping. You don't need to wait for inspiration, permission, or the perfect set of circumstances anymore. You've built a rhythm that supports your life. You've constructed a way of being that no longer relies on hype to keep going. At this stage, consistency is no longer something you're working on. It's part of your identity. It's in how you move, how you think, how you make decisions. You begin to look at your goals not as distant dreams, but as inevitabilities. Not because you're arrogant, but because you know what happens when you keep showing up. You've felt the shift. You've seen what daily effort does when it's given room to breathe. And here's what's interesting. When consistency becomes a lifestyle, everything else begins to align around it. Your relationships feel more stable because you're more stable. Your energy isn't so scattered. Your confidence isn't on a roller coaster anymore. You start attracting opportunities, not because you're trying harder, but because your presence carries a quiet authority now. You radiate the kind of energy that comes from follow-through. There's no magic behind this transformation, just truth. The truth that doing something small, day after day, reshapes you from the inside out. The truth that routines aren't boring when they're tied to your purpose. The truth that repetition isn't stagnation, it's mastery in motion. When you stop chasing the next big burst of inspiration and instead anchor yourself in repeatable action, you begin to realize something powerful. You were never lacking potential. You just needed structure. You just needed to stay long enough to become who you were always capable of being. And what's beautiful about this new rhythm is that it doesn't need to be perfect. You still have off days. You still get tired. You still deal with resistance. But now, those moments don't derail you. You don't spiral from one missed workout or one skipped writing session. You course correct quickly because your foundation is solid. You know how to come back to your center. You've built too much to throw it away. This is where the old version of you, impatient, easily distracted, overly dependent on mood, starts to fade. Not because they were bad, but because you've outgrown them. You're no longer seduced by shortcuts. You've learned to fall in love with the process. You know now that greatness isn't found in explosive moments, but in the quiet repetition of your values. The most extraordinary lives are built from the most ordinary days. And somewhere along the way, you stop measuring yourself by how far you still have to go. Instead, you start appreciating how far you've come. You remember when you used to doubt your own ability to stay consistent for even a week. You remember the false starts, the stop-and-go cycles, the shame that came with not keeping promises to yourself. And now, here you are, still going, still choosing alignment over excuses, still doing the thing, not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. The unstoppable version of you isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout or prove anything. It simply moves forward, quietly, relentlessly, rooted in the power of habit. And yes, that version of you might still have fears, still feel resistance, still experience doubt. But the difference now is that none of those things hold the steering wheel anymore. You do. You've built consistency into your identity, and that changes the game forever. Now, you know how to trust yourself again. You know how to stay when it gets boring. You know how to push when it gets hard. And most importantly, you know how to rest without quitting. Because consistency doesn't mean you never pause. It means you don't unravel every time you do. It means the pause has a purpose, and the comeback is already in motion. This is the version of you that others start to notice, not just because of what you've achieved, but because of how grounded you are. You become someone people look to, someone people can rely on, someone whose life reflects what's possible when discipline becomes love and structure becomes freedom. And if you're not there yet, don't worry. This chapter isn't about celebrating a destination. It's about reminding you that it exists, that the power of consistency isn't just for the ultra-productive or the naturally focused. It's for you, the you who struggles, who slips, who restarts again and again, the you who's still figuring it out. You're closer than you think. Becoming unstoppable doesn't require perfection. It just requires one more step, one more rep, one more day of showing up when you could have disappeared. That's what makes you different. That's what builds your future. Not a single moment of brilliance, but the steady, beautiful decision to keep going. Becoming unstoppable isn't about becoming superhuman. It's about finally realizing that you don't need to be. It's about learning to take action without waiting to feel like it. You stop sitting around hoping for clarity or permission or a lightning bolt of motivation. Instead, you decide that progress is what you do now. That showing up, rain or shine, inspired or not, is part of who you are. And that decision changes you. Because when consistency becomes a lifestyle, everything starts to simplify. You don't waste hours wrestling with whether or not to do the thing. You already know. You've already chosen. That mental clutter, that back and forth noise that used to exhaust you, it quiets down. Not because you're never uncertain, but because you've trained yourself to act despite uncertainty. You begin to think differently. You walk into your day with a sense of direction, even if it's not perfect. You no longer rely on dramatic goals or big emotional moments. You know the power lives in the little actions, the repeated ones, the boring ones, the ones that don't impress anyone else, but continue to build something sacred within you. There's freedom in that. Freedom in knowing that your future doesn't depend on having a perfect day. It depends on what you choose to repeat. That kind of freedom feels like peace, like stability, like self-respect. You stop searching for quick wins and start anchoring in a long-term alignment. You stop comparing your pace to everyone else's because you understand your consistency will compound in ways you can't even predict yet. You begin to trust time, and that's when life starts to expand. Doors open, not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. Opportunities find you because your energy is consistent. People start to notice, not your hustle, but your presence, your steadiness. You become someone who doesn't just dream, but builds. Someone who doesn't just start, but finishes. There's a quiet kind of confidence that comes with this shift. You don't have to constantly prove or push. You're not running on fumes anymore. You're grounded. You're steady. You're rooted in who you've chosen to become. And what's beautiful is that you know this is sustainable because it's not built on hype. It's built on habit. It's not riding waves. It's building a current. Even when life throws chaos your way, and it will, you bend but don't break. You have something to fall back on. A rhythm, a structure, a way of being that keeps you tethered to your purpose, even when the world around you is unpredictable. You're no longer constantly trying to get back on track, because this is the track. Even when you drift, you don't drift far. You become the kind of person who returns to your habits like a home. You no longer fear the bad days, because you know one bad day isn't the end. It's just a dip in the rhythm. You trust yourself to return. And that kind of self-trust, that's what makes you unstoppable. It's not about being the best. It's about being relentless. Gentle, but relentless. Kind to yourself, but deeply committed. You don't quit when it's hard. You don't stop when it gets boring. You don't wait until you feel like it. You move forward because that's what you do now. Not because it's always easy, but because it's always worth it. That's the energy of someone who's in it for the long game. Someone who's no longer waiting for life to get easier, but instead is becoming someone stronger. Someone who knows their goals are already being built through their consistency, even when results haven't fully arrived yet. And when they do arrive, when the external finally catches up to the internal, you'll be ready. You'll be standing tall in a life you didn't just wish for, but worked for. You won't be surprised by the success, because you'll know exactly what it took. All those early mornings, quiet nights, boring reps, and tiny decisions, they built this. You built this. So if you're reading this and wondering if it's working, if it's worth it, if you're even making a dent, don't stop. Don't doubt the process just because the proof hasn't shown up yet. The process is the proof. You're showing up. You're building muscle, mental, emotional, spiritual. You're becoming someone who doesn't need to restart every time life gets messy. You're becoming someone who lives with consistency, not as a burst, but as a baseline. You've stopped playing small with your potential. You've stepped out of the cycle of waiting and wavering. You've anchored into the truth that steady always beats sudden, that quiet always outlasts loud, that showing up today, again, without fanfare, is what shapes your future.